Welcome everyone to today's Praxist Table Talk. I'm Meloria, the Media Administrator, and our discussion for today will include various topics concerning philosophy and the current decadence of our society. Joining us today, we have our founder, Vincent.
Hello.
And two very important members of leadership, Kennedy and Cody.
Welcome.
Hello.
Also joining us today, a very special guest, Yizz The Eunuch.
Hello, thank you.
Yeah, how's everyone doing today?
I'm doing pretty good.
Doing fine. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Doing good. Glad to be here myself. Looking forward to a good conversation.
Yeah, me too. So, one of the things you mentioned off call, or maybe not even off call, but like in just in our emails back and forth, was the go free method. So I kind of wanted to know a little bit more about that before we just jumped into anything.
Certainly. I discovered it a little more than a year ago, maybe about a year and 4 months ago. And the go free method is from a guy who has been involved in advocating for the well-being of white people for about, I think, 28, 29 years, almost 30 years, going back to the early 90s. He, of course, like a lot of people who care about white people, has been, of course, involved with many different white identity groups of different stripes. And over the years, he discovered that the primary reason white folks were losing their identity was what he came to call the anti-white narrative. And it was not necessarily even an agenda, which there most certainly is, but we lived under the shadow of an anti-white, anti-Western narrative, where for generations in media, schools, movies, political discourse, the disillusion of white ethnicities, because, you know, race is your race group, like Caucasian, African,
Right.
etc. Ethnicity is your nationality, like Japanese or Finnish or whatever, right? Well, white ethnicities, especially in the Anglosphere, were dissolving. And he discovered it was because it was an anti-white narrative that programmed people's minds with what I used to call mind poison. And it's funny because they're the same two letters as what he calls meme pathogens, M-E-M-E pathogens, MPs for short. These meme pathogens are things like we're a melting pot, or there's only one race, the human race, or we're a nation of immigrants in America. These things are mimetic pathogens. They are a spiritual, mental cancer that infects white folks, especially in the Anglosphere. And it's part of the anti-white doctrines that were brought in via our own good nature through Christianity and how we have developed in the last several hundred years, paired with liberalism and capitalism. These things were ushered in after the long march through the institutions in the early parts of the 1900s. And these mimetic pathogens, they've infected generations and generations of white folks. And the best way that we can care about white folks of all kinds is to go free of that anti-white narrative, because it is the anti-white narrative that leads white women and white men to hating themselves or being addicted to porn or not wanting to procreate or hating children. And of course, all great civilizations already struggle with low birth rates, degeneracy, and those kind of things, just historically speaking, looking at every successful empire in the history of humanity. But in the modern era, you on top of that, in America, you have an active agenda that wants to put out cancerous, degenerate, anti-God, atheist, anti-white ideals into the populace via messaging and video games, via messaging and commercials, messaging in movies, TV shows, even in political and educational discourse. We are told things that make us sound like evil colonizers. And the pinnacle of all of this hinges on weaponized white guilt. That's why he took on the public name, No White Guilt. So Jason Kuna's public name is No White Guilt. And the white well-being website hub is called nowhiteguilt.org. And when I discovered this method, I got the book. It's a cheap, small workbook. It's like a mix of a lab work manual and a terms glossary just for learning things.
Right.
And the reason I liked it is it wasn't an ideology. It wasn't about socioeconomics. It wasn't trying to talk you into joining some kind of club or anything. It was just a useful, short series of mental and verbal exercises to get you out of the anti-white narrative and equip you with the tools and the language and the mindset you needed to operate outside the anti-white narrative and simply, easily relate that to other people. That's why we use the 5 core terms: anti-white, anti-whiteism, anti-white narrative, white erasure, and Western kind. Those 5 terms together, any Tom, Dick, and Harry just naturally understands what you mean when you say it. When you talk about white erasure in movies, in commercials, people in the West just get it because every commercial they see has got to have mixed-race couple. It's got to have a non-white dude with a white woman. It's got to have maybe a white couple with an African kid or whatever. Then when you look at movies, you look at video games, you look at their favorite TV shows, people in the West understand white erasure. We're being literally erased in front of our eyes. In history class, especially with the whole COOF lockdown stuff, parents by the millions have seen the garbage their kids are bringing home from school. They're seeing the alteration of history, even within the last 20 years. They're seeing the removal of white people. They go to Google. They'll search for great inventors. It shows like 50 black people and some Chinese guys. And they are seeing the white erasure of their own history in front of them and in their children's school books. And then you call us all together Western kind. Like, you're still a Frenchman, you're still a Canadian, you're still Finnish, you're still Scottish, but we're all Western kind. We're all Westmen together. And these terms allow us to talk about our own narrative, our own issues. We need to band together, stop the oppressive anti-whiteism, end the white erasure, and care about white folks in white countries. And when you talk about the reason why you use this terminology instead of older things like the white nationalists in America used, like neo-Nazis and National Socialists used, and like many white identitarians use that lean towards some kind of neo-fascism, the terminology and the ideas put forward by those myriad white identity camps, they have a very, let's just call it triggering response. When 19 out of 20 regular people hear you bring up terms that are involved in those camps, the meme pathogens make those people wall off and not want to hear you because those words are associated with the villains in the anti-white narrative. And so by not playing a villain, we get to be heroes in our own story and encourage other people to be heroes with us in a positive, inclusive way for all Western kind. And the name of the book is called Aligning to the Archetype of the West, because this is not about some kind of racial genome purity, nor is it about some kind of, Evola would like this, about some kind of spiritual ideal purity like the Aryan spirit. It's about advocating for the well-being of white people in white countries and stopping the obvious and blatant anti-white narrative against us, and using terminology that will not make you a villain and will include others in that fight with you, even if they happen to not be white. So that's the Go Free application and how I came to it and what it means to me in a nutshell. Hopefully that susses things out pretty well for you.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of interesting topics. Cody, do you want to take it away?
Well, because I have examples just in recent memory now of all those things Yizz just described, and like one of the most stark and jaw-dropping ones was an actual government campaign in Germany, I guess proselytizing and what is it, advertising for African migrant men to go and start families with ethnic German women. And it was so jarring that even regular Germans stopped, took pictures of the signs and the advertisement stuff like that, and we were going, "What the hell is this?" But there's even things
according to the UN, that's actual genocide.
That's genocide. Yeah, no. Yeah. I actually remember visiting the UN and looking at the Charter of Human Rights that they have, and there was like 24, 27, something of that number of air quote human rights that they try to define, and that's one of the things that they say is a type of genocide, and it's quite concerning that that's probably associated with other United Nations NGOs that go in and help fund or help organize things like that, and it's just baffling to see just so blatantly and brazenly in society. But there's also things recently too, like I think it was the Chicago art gala or some art museum that fired all of their staff, their volunteer staff, because it was predominantly older white well-off women in the city that were volunteering their time to go help run the museum, and they instead went for salaried positions for air quote minority peoples to run the museum, and it was
There's a
also
great
another
example of that in America.
jaw-dropping event of like, oh, okay.
I didn't mean to interrupt. There's a jaw-dropping evil example that's very much like that in California from Governor Newsom. California, of course, we all make jokes about, but California really is the leader of the anti-white regime in America right now. And they put forth legislation last year. The year before that, they already made a diversity quota for, I think it was any business with more than like 500 or 1,000 employees or something. So basically any large business had to meet certain diversity quotas among their leadership, among their board of directors and things. And then they added a clause to it last year. I made a video about it, about LGBT inclusion. But here's the sinister thing. The way that it's worded, they put this lesbian, bisexual, trans, gay, whatever stuff, this clause in there that said, if you meet this parameter as a white person, you do not meet you no longer are qualified for replacement. So the way that the law was structured, it said, if you are a white person and you are a wealthy, successful business owner, or you're on a board, or you have an executive position in a successful company and you're white, the way that you secure your job and not be replaced by pressure from the state is declare yourself lesbian, bisexual, gay, or transgender.
Wow.
It's like the old Sam Hyde joke of state-enforced homosexuality. Just
it
you know,
literally is that.
that kind of makes
Sam
me.
Hyde is such a prolific comedian, like not prolific, but a prophetic comedian in so many senses. Him and Owen Benjamin, I think, are two of my favorites in that regard, because they just speak truth in such a comedic fashion that you're like, wow, that's fucked up, but that's actually happening.
It almost makes me wonder if these things that these quotas are made, especially in relation to white people, because they want these people to not have families, and they know that, traditionally in America at least, white people had the most family-oriented worldviews. So now maybe if they can undermine that in white people, they can get more productivity out of them, more loyalty as a company from the individual. So it kind of removes all senses of identity. Not only that, but just by feeding them into the system, by feeding them this marginalized minority identity, even though they are the majority as a racial group,
Mm-hmm. That is one of the topics we discussed in a previous episode on the subversion of the black community throughout history of the United States, and then moving on to the rest of the U.S. population as well. And we were kind of theorizing that they were the test group on these different social pressures to erode these familial and religious values that were so well instantiated in black Americans in the turn of the last century, that even despite Jim Crow and everything else, they were thriving in many senses as communities, both economically and whatchamacallit, spiritually, as just their own distinct pocket nationality within the U.S. And we've seen that now outstretched to every institution imaginable, on not just eroding, at least in America, the white populations, but atomizing all peoples and sort of having that self-doubt. And I think that the white populations of all these Western nations are just the host populations that need to be eroded hardest for everyone else to be atomized, so that we're all that sort of neoliberal tax chattel that is just in constant servitude to the slave of our debts.
I absolutely agree with that, because I think that when you look at whatever you want to call the quote enemies that we have right now, right? The globalists, the anti-whites, whatever you want to call them.
The Satanists, I like you refer to them as that ones too.
Absolutely, the satanic child abusers, yeah, they definitely are.
Yeah.
Like, whatever you want to call this cult, this death cult that wants total control of the planet, whatever you want to call them, it's very obvious they want everyone to be an atomized individual, because individuals have no power. They have no roots. They are deracinated, selfish, and not immoral, amoral, because an individual has no moral sway, has no moral spiritual power. They want race to mean nothing. They want ethnicity to mean nothing. They want religion to mean nothing. They want your family to mean nothing. And they don't want you to have a supportive physical community that you're part of. They want us all to be free-floating individuals for their globalist equations. That's what they want. That is the goal, because then nothing will ever rival them. That is the goal.
And what's funny is that some people on the right actually buy into this. They buy into this this sort of anti-groupthink, which I don't want to say that like groupthink is inherently good, but what it does is it severs the ability of a person to reconcile with their own in-group. So like, for example, white people especially don't reconcile with any, like, they don't amass a group, they don't amass a like anything outside of the current institutions. So what you have is a mirror of that on the right, where everyone says, oh, I want to be a free thinker. Oh, I want, these specific rights that were given to me in the Constitution, and I want them in the context of today. And what it does is it kind of silences their ability to actually free think. Because if you look at everyone who claims that, all of their opinions are actually the same as everyone else who claims that they themselves are a free thinker. They have the same exact mentality. And
there's no depth.
Yeah, there's no depth to it. And this actually brings me to one of the things that I've mentioned before. It's that what you have today is you have the left, which is legitimized by freedom, fighting for authority. And then you have the right, which is legitimized by authority, fighting for freedom. So none of these groups can actually actualize anything that they actually want. They can never fulfill their goals because they're constantly being hypocritical and antithetical to their own narrative. So what you have...
There's actually another reason. If you can give me a minute, I'd like to share what it is.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that the primary reason that we have lost that and we have that struggle is because we live in a previously healthy biospiritual community, and now we live in a fractured, unhealthy community because other biospirits have come in great numbers into our sphere. And a biospiritual sphere is a good way to talk about the many different ethnicities of a racial parent group. The term biospirit I get from the Go Free manual. That's one of the many terms in there. A biospirit it's a term that encompasses what a people are based upon what they do together and the sympathies they feel with one another when in large numbers. So you could say a biospiritual sphere, like, you know how people use the term black community, gay community, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah.
This is a more applicable term to use for that, because in the West, we have the Anglosphere biospiritual sphere. That is a part of the Caucasian white parent biosphere, the biospiritual sphere, right? When you look at Africans, Asians, Caucasians, etc., you can see that these parent groups, there's like 7 or 8 in the world or whatever. These parent groups, they have a biospiritual expression of different kinds of civilization that are blatantly obvious to anyone who studies history, art, literature, etc. There are differences between these things. That's why in universities, even till this day, you have things like Asian art history, Asian socioeconomics, Asian literature history. You have the same things for African. You have the same things for South American. You have the same things for European. These biospiritual differences are what's a good way to put it? A natural philosopher would say that they are one of the most blatant facts that exist, as much as the ocean is made of water, that kind of thing. So when you have a conflicting or broken biospiritual sphere, it means there's disharmony. The synergy of that people is lost, and it begins to naturally decay, and the mechanisms of society begin to fall apart because the gears and the struts and the grease and everything has worn out, and it's not being replaced. It's being replaced by alien components, and the machine no longer functions. And I think that, just like we talked about earlier about, the long march through the institutions, and then starting with the era of mass migration in the West in the 1970s, that was really the last nail in the coffin for Western civilization. Because when you start bringing in millions and millions of people rapidly, there is no conformity. There's no aligning to the archetype of the parent of the host population. There's no aligning to the archetype of wherever they happen to be. And so you have desynergy. You have disharmony. And that biospiritual conflict comes from numerical courage. And that's another term from the Go Free book. Once a biospiritual expression has numeric courage, it begins to naturally, and I don't even mean on purpose, try to disrupt society. Naturally, competing biospiritual spheres in large numbers, they naturally butt heads and compete. Just look at the last 30 years of Islam in the United Kingdom. Look at the last 20 years of Islam in Sweden. Those are from different biospiritual spheres that have very different religious biospiritual expressions. They butt heads, they don't get along, and it creates social disharmony and things start to fall apart. So that's what I think that the real basis for all of this is.
You know, that kind of goes into something that we talk about a little bit, is that so we have these lines upon which we organize ourselves. We have what I call the hourglass analogy, and that means basically that we have traditional semantics. If you picture an hourglass, we have traditional semantics on one side of the hourglass, and on the other side of the hourglass is anti-traditional semantics. And traditional semantics are characterized by an absolute attribute, right? They're characterized by an absolute source, and usually the source is like some kind of divine principle, and this serves as the basis for all other things. So from this divine principle, you get, you know, a spiritual purpose, you get an ordainment, you get like castes, you get the purpose of the state, you get purpose of basically everything in life is ordered from this top-down perspective of what is divine, and what is divine then kind of creates what is proper. But on the other side, you have anti-traditional semantics, which are ordered from a relative character. They derive their legitimacy from largely popular approval, which usually manifests from material desire. And so what we had before, especially in the West, and this is kind of true for like as a global community, as you know, global homo gets more influential, but in the West especially, we had a society that was built upon traditional semantics. We had, you know, the church, we had you know, basically religiosity, spiritualism. We maintained the rights, and we maintained the proper social order of, you know, family orientation and things like that. And somewhere around the secular age, I think that you could say that the roots of this were from a much older cause.
The Enlightenment forward, basically.
Yeah. That hourglass flipped. So what you see, what used to be was that traditional semantics were the bottom of the hourglass, and so all of the sand fell towards those semantics. We had the substance of the society, which is the sand, fall towards what was gravitating it, which were these semantics, this divine source of legitimacy, which I would characterize as like a supra-personal, supra-physical, entirely metaphysical and sort of like meta-human type of entity. And so that's what the sand fell towards. And then around the time of the secular age, we flipped it all towards these materialistic, anti-traditional semantics. So now the sand is slowly falling towards these semantics. And over time, you see how the substance of the society has shifted from these original traditional forms down to what is now sort of anti-traditional, very materialistic, very relative. And that kind of goes
I would call that progressive ink.
Yeah, definitely progressive. Yeah, progressive. And so basically what you have now is a source of legitimacy that's completely unstable. So what's supposed to be the stable center of, you know, everything that's ordered out from it is in itself something that is not actually fundamentally correct, or even fundamentally identifiable, because, you know, as soon as you have things like human rights become the source of legitimacy for your society, instead of like the divine characteristic from which these rights are created, then you lose yourself in the arbitrary nature of all of these philosophies that are coming together. So that's what I think. That's what I use to characterize it, is the hourglass analogy. You have this flip that ever so slowly pulls down this sand, which is the substance of the society, to whatever source of legitimacy that society is given at the time.
Right. I get you.
And I think to add on to that, it's that point in history where Europe, in large part, were these megalithic colonizers of the rest of the world, and going around and instantiating themselves as overruling societies upon the lands in which they claim to discover or claim to conquer. But the thing with that is that once they established that, there was a sentiment of goodwill in a lot of those places, despite some of the war and tragedy that may have occurred that gets exaggerated and demonized in the modern institutions. But you had that religious and altruistic Europe from a long time past exporting all these institutions of churches and infrastructure and art and linguistics to these other less developed places of the world, whether they be Africa or the Middle East or somewhere else that may have had their own sort of infrastructure, but not as technologically or philosophically instantiated as Europe had at that time. And now that it's become this secularization of Europe, instead of exporting all of these good infrastructures and building churches in Africa and things like that, you just take Africans in today's age and import them into Europe. And it's that secularization that thinks that that's how to solve the issues that they see in the world, and it only is worsening those effects.
If I can interrupt for just 1 second, because I kind of remembered where I was going with that. So that I kind of got lost in the analogy itself, but basically that was.
He tends to do that. Just giving you a warning, Yizz.
Yeah.
That's fine. We all do. It's good. Go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, the point I was making was that different societies, especially in prehistoric and ancient times, were manifestations of whatever principle was divine for them at the time. So you have these societies like Rome, where what you would characterize as a race was legitimized by what they saw as the divine principle, was their expression of that principle through their pantheon and through their government and things like that. And then you have the Arabs who were legitimized by Islam, and then who were previously legitimized by things like Zoroastrianism or whatever else was in the Middle East or around that area at the time.
And so on.
Yeah.
And so what you have is race is characterized traditionally as an expression of these fundamental absolute principles, where now race has become this muddied in the waters definition of
No pun intended.
yeah yeah, exactly. But yeah, it really has become a muddy definition where now it's become very arbitrary and very lost, and that's seemingly something that's only affected the West. And I think that it's because of the secularization of the Enlightenment, and maybe like some of the areas that came right before it, like the humanism of the Renaissance and things like that. All of that sort of culminated in us losing that divine source, and then losing our identity as a result of that.
Yeah, I think that you could. I mean, you can make direct parallels with that in the decay of Rome as well.
Absolutely.
Anyways,
we don't have our own Caesars or great men to reverse the course of direction, things like that. And the
managerial bureaucrats have become the kings and leaders. It's pathetic.
And the bureaucrats have become far more influential and powerful than any government or any principality of antiquity has ever thought or dreamed of becoming.
And modernity first made the warrior class almost a joke, and now the warrior class is practically non-existent. And I'm not talking about a professional soldier.
We definitely know. Yeah.
Of people that arise through the biospiritual sphere as great warriors, people of strong of spirit, of mind, like the philosopher kings of old, the philosopher warriors of old. That caste was always at least venerated in healthy Western societies, all the way up to the modern era until about 100 years ago. And then after the Brother War era started, which is what they call the Civil War in America, I call it the war between the states, of course, because it wasn't a civil war, it was a secession war. That's one of the many lies of the anti-white narrative. But when the Brother War era started, between 1850 to 1950, that's the Brother War era, from that period forward, the warrior caste has basically been eradicated, especially in the Anglosphere, but in most white countries. And I think that is because modernity, these evil, sniveling non-men, these last men, they have become the ones with all of the power. And when you have the weak men, the last men, when you have these people in control, they fear the warrior caste. They fear the philosopher king. And so they've done everything they can in the anti-white narrative to literally neuter that kind of man from existing. That's why one of the first things that this new age went for in the anti-white agenda was crippling men, because they knew that when the divine order, when the natural order is broken, when the patriarchy falls, that creates chaos. And in chaos, the forces of evil can take root. And that's why it is apt to call our enemies satanic if you want to use biblical nomenclature. Satanic is the inversion of the divine order. They made male become female, female become male, right become wrong, and worst of all, they made God become self. And that's what they've done in the quote unquote progressive era of the last 100 years. And that's exactly what I think the removal of the warrior caste has come from, is that specific attack on the divine order and masculinity itself to destroy what they call patriarchy.
So a few things I guess I want to add to that too is that warrior class being sort of phased out in society is a bit of a very old process that went on with this transition into the merchant class, going as far back as even the Renaissance and the instantiation of these empires being built across Europe, whether it be Spain, or France, or the UK. Yeah, because it was these megalithic corporations, even as far back as then, like the East India Company for either the Dutch or the US or the UK versions of it, and other such companies like that went around and sort of capitalized on the banking infrastructure of all these nations. Or even look at things in the Renaissance period with like the Medicis and these old houses of money that were getting behind the banking infrastructures or the movement of money infrastructures in society. And I think Keith Woods did a very good breakdown on the sort of history that played into that transition from the warrior caste to the very much to the mercantile class. Yeah. And there's also the priestly caste as well. That's that kind of trifecta between the different phases of civilization that get transferred between who's ruling what period. And you see that through these overarching narratives throughout history. But that's why I like people like the Golden One, if you're familiar with him. He's if anyone listening doesn't know him, the Golden One's a Swedish vlogger that is very into self-discipline and that sort of divine kingly attitude, and he's the one that is he's the post physique like I am online dealing with people very much. I'm the post physique to win the culture war sort of dude. And it's always funny to see whenever you do that, people just squirm and say, "What are you talking about?" Or it has nothing to do with intelligence. And it's hilarious to just watch people squirm on not having the self-control or the discipline. Yeah, quick physiognomy check just to own the libs.
I didn't hear that. Can you say that again, Kennedy?
I feel like it's like a correlation between physical healthiness and being actually intelligent, honestly, and IQ.
The mind body spirit thing is all effective. If you're ill in one, it's going to cause deleterious effects to the other two.
And you know what's funny is that actually kind of manifests like in actual behavior. Like if you're working out or if you're doing something physical, you tend to think more and you tend to
it's a serotonin boost.
Yeah. You become kind of like a philosopher while you're working. I remember that
a philosopher warrior.
Yeah, I had a warehouse job not too long ago that was very like physically draining. But I remember that when I was there, I was alone a lot of the time. So I got a chance to think. And so actually that 40-page document or doctrine, that was pretty much written in my head at the time of me working. And so I just kind of got home and put it all onto paper. But that was because I was, active. The blood was flowing, all of that. The juices were flowing, so
teach their sons to be that way. That's what we lack in the West. We need that. We need most of our men being like that.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
why I always bring up people like Owen Benjamin, because he is the actualization of that, where he once was that sort of degenerate Hollywood elite that still had some sense and self-awareness about him to see the things that were going down like right in front of him in Hollywood and going, oh, this is not okay. And now he's moved out to the countryside of Idaho, has 4 children, and built a parallel society. If I'm guessing you've seen that.
But I saw a long video with him and Blonde in the Belly of the Beast, and I really liked what he had. He seemed like
he has like a few different websites and stuff too. I'd really recommend following him because
He definitely had a come to Jesus moment, so to speak.
Oh, very much so, very much so. I think I'd kind of consider him one of like a modern apostle sort of deal. Like if there was someone worthy of canonization as like a saint or something, maybe he hasn't committed any miracles yet, but he's definitely going down that road of like philosopher king vibes. I mean, he calls himself the Bard King too, but he definitely has brought a lot of people towards that rearing of families and animal husbandry or the homesteading and things like that. Just naturalistic, holistic lifestyles that are self-sustaining and community-oriented. And now there's tens of thousands of people who don't even know who he is, that have sort of come and communed with all these different, they call themselves bears in the Beartarian community, and have built these little micro infrastructures. Like I was going to go slaughter a cow actually and get like learn how the actual process of dismembering and like preparing the meat and everything would work on a farm sense from one of these people I met through the bear community. And it's sort of those little things that you'll pick up on with this sort of imminent looming collapse of society kind of hanging right above us, or that we're a part of in this free fall of Western civilization, which will kind of cascade and affect all other civilizations around the world, because we were the keystones of all these other nations, whether it be China, people saying that, oh, they're going to be the next superpower, but they're still so heavily reliant on the West, especially the U.S.
Or places like paper tiger, and I don't fear it at all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And or places like Africa, that many African nations depending on foreign aid that would absolutely go away and like not just destabilize but destroy many of those nations because of that dependence they have on Western nations and all this aid and all these militaristic infrastructures and all these NGOs and everything. That if the West falls like it is falling, the entire world is going to suffer and nothing's going to save it, with maybe very few pockets of these Galapagos nations like Russia or like Japan that have been excluded because of their geopolitical turmoils that have helped them sort of become self-sustaining, but they'd still be rocked by such a collapse, a world collapse in the
I think
in that fallout.
At this point, I'd like to say that the reason why I stopped covering politics, I stopped really caring about anything on a federal level or global geopolitical posturing and stuff. I only really advocate for white well-being and for helping people escape the anti-white narrative, and I promote localism, which is basically parallelism on top of using local politics to buy yourself time and keep the anti-white agenda out as much as you can. So the purpose of that is because in America especially, we have millions of Americans who still know how to raise and slaughter animals, to tend farmland. We are heavily armed, we have good Christian values, and we still have some semblance of a shared biospiritual expression of an ethnicity. That's why I am sympathetic to nationalism still, because as weaponized and as anti-white as all of that hyper-patriotic, jingoistic crap was part of the Brother War era, there still is a truth to that millions of Americans share in a healthy way. And that's why I promote not like everybody being part of the same team, so to speak, doing localism, but all across America, I'm trying to get people into homesteading, into trading locally, into building their own church groups, their own trade groups, their own meat and poultry groups, because we actually have a chance in America to survive well. Not just survive at all, but survive well during this global geopolitical fracturing. Because
to thrive, in a sense.
We have great numbers, we have a shared language, a shared religion, and a shared contiguous piece of land called North America. And when you look at it, all of these I call them the fallen sometimes jokingly, these white people that have fallen to anti-whiteism so far, they're basically the enemy. Like all of these cancerous cities, all of these, some people call them shit libs or midwits or whatever, all of these problematic people, even within our own people, even within our own churches sometimes, these people are almost universally in large numbers only in cities around the coasts.
Yeah.
And if things do start to crumble, well, where does everything really come from? It comes from the heart of America, which is people like me, people like my family, people like the millions of other Americans that tend farms and work factories and work in machine shops and drive trucks and operate radios and operate airliners that operate trains. These people are the lifeblood of this, whatever you want to call us, this ethnicity, this experiment, this part of Western kind. And I think that if we have enough of us with the ideas like all five of us are talking about here today, if we have enough people that are at least a little bit on board when things start to break apart, we're going to survive better than any other group I can think of on the planet because of what we have and what we still share. That's why you still hear me talk like a good old patriotic nationalist of yesteryear, because I like kindling what I can to keep the people in this country alive and connected. And I think that's part of it.
Yeah, I think that's what our ultimate goal is, in a certain sense, is to build that sort of parallel society and turn ourselves into the elites that we're lacking in this culture war.
More accurately,
because,
it'll probably be our children and grandchildren that will be the elites that,
yeah,
that actually
definitely planting
yeah.
the seeds for trees of shade we'll never know.
Exactly,
That sort of
right.
deal.
Especially me, 'cause I'm old. You guys all sound young.
Yeah, we're all about in our 20s, and a lot of the members in our group are very young and sort of energetic to get things, yeah, ready to get things going, because we see the sort of necessity of this all going on. But that's kind of what I'm doing myself personally, is I've started a garden for the first time this past year, and to see how things work on growing my own food, researching things into knowing how to raise animals. I was kind of forced out of college, but I think that was a blessing in disguise, because now I've moved into welding and teaching myself different other practical skills that are going to be much more helpful in a practical sense, but would still tend towards those passions, because I was going to school originally for aerospace engineering, and that welding can still kind of get me in the door that way without having to deal with all the degenerative debauchery that happens on college campuses.
When it comes to universities, I probably have a bit of a biased opinion, but I'm a hillbilly, and I grew up with mostly old-timey Scottish and Irish-based Americans from 180, 200 years ago in this area, and I have some East European family that immigrated over here during the early Cold War era in the 40s and 50s, and the way I grew up, learning to hunt and fish at a young age, learning about gardening, learning how to field dress a deer, learning how to gut fish, learning how to survive out in the wild, not because you have to, but because it's just what people did out here in the mountains. Like my great-grandfather, my grandfather, some of my family from Eastern Europe, from the Ukraine, these people would be looked down upon and spit on and considered the dumbest, most backwards people by these university people. But all of my family, I feel like they were smarter, knew more about life, and educated me better than every university professor I ever took a class from. And I think
absolutely. That's like my sorry to interrupt.
I'm just going to say, and I think that is what we need to engender that idea to, I hate to use the term, but to sort of deprogram young people of your guys' age and younger of the whole university corporate path, because I see that as the modern version of serfdom slavery. And I think we should be teaching our people to avoid that and build something real together and pass on real knowledge and real experience, instead of just learning how to be a specialized cog in the globalist machine.
That's what I was going to add is my sister and her husband now just had their first child, and they're both incredibly smart individuals. He was a former neurosurgeon. She was studying to become a forensic investigator for my state. And they together, even though they're very much on that sort of neoliberal sort of mindset and the more atheistic mindset, they still see the trends of things going as much of a normie mentality they might have on incorporating these structures and eventually going to raise their child, my nephew, into a proper person to know these things. And they're growing their own food, and they have a well on their property that gives them water and stuff and pumps it into their house. That is, they could almost be off grid in a certain sense, but they were much intertwined in that university setting, in that globo homo sort of mentality, but saw the sort of decay occurring and going, oh, maybe we should do the opposite of that and not look down on the people that have these practical skills in the first place and get them ourselves. Because he was a former he came from Poland himself and lived under the USSR and saw a lot of the rough living that you had to survive under in a lot of the back countries of Poland. And he had a lot of this outdoorsman skill already, but lost it a little bit as he got more Americanized. And now he's sort of reteaching himself and learning more about these things alongside my sister and going to pass that on to their child.
One thing I'd like to share about myself is I know that I talk about, being a hillbilly and being part of the land and all of that. And I definitely believe those things are incredibly valuable. But I don't want you or the others listening to think that I'm some kind of Luddite or think that the pinnacle of society is to live like the Amish. I'm not opposed to spaceships. I'm not opposed to technology or medicine. But what I am opposed to is the obvious results of when those things take precedence and disrupt the divine order. Like
The reliance and decadence.
Yeah.
And I do think that the reason that I advocate for the things I do now is I believe that we absolutely are in the ashes. We are in the shadow of the Colossus as it is falling, and we need to do everything we can to survive that impact when it does. And if in the future, if our grandchildren once again have a technologically rich society, I would like it to be based on healthy values that we espouse here. And if we do have spaceships, if we do have faster than light travel or whatever, I want it to be our values of us talking here today that make it to the stars and that engender the future of our species long into the future, not someone else's. And I think that's a critical part that you need to understand about me. I don't think that living, a subsistence lifestyle is the pinnacle that I see for our species in perpetuity forever. I don't, but I do think that that's where our focus needs to be now. So when that Colossus does hit, we're not all going to be cast to the winds and gone. There's going to be enough of us in a strong survival position to carry on our ideals and to carry on our people's biospirit into the future.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
I think that's
Sorry to cut you off, but so I myself am a person who's very productivity oriented. I hate to be like dormant. I hate not doing anything. I like to feel like I'm very much a productive person and using the time that I have to do something that is going to produce results. So when it comes to technology, I see technology as nothing but the tool of scale. It's the tool of efficiency. I really like to be efficient with my time. So if technology was just assumed to be this thing that allowed you to get done a task that needed to get done on a broader scale more efficiently, then I don't think I would have any issue with it. I think my issue with technology comes with the fact that not only is there a reliance on it so that people's mental skills and people's ability to live their lives normally has become hindered by that reliance, that interdependence, but also the fact that it's used as the tool of scale to bring up the amount of degeneracy and decadence that's in our society instead of prop up the that sort of asceticism and spiritual actualization that it could be used towards.
It promotes and embellishes the negative instead of the positive. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, exactly. So technology is nothing but a tool, and what we have mostly in physicality, like in the physical universe, as opposed to like metaphysics and religion and all of that. What you have is these tools. So technology is one of those tools where it can be used. It's amoral, like you said. These people are amoral. The technology is amoral. It can be used either way. And the same thing with like power. If you have, institutional power, it can be used either way. And
exactly.
I think that some people shoot themselves in the foot when they denounce, number one, when they denounce technology, but number two, when they also denounce things like power, because what they are is essentially limiting the tools at their disposal for them to fulfill whatever it is they want to get done.
Absolutely. Can we segue into something that we talked about pre-show a little bit about excuse me, about individualism, collectivism, the concept of freedom versus authority? Do you mind if I start a topic for us to chew on together?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely.
You can go ahead.
Segueing from the technological thing that a lot of people seem to miss or don't understand that it can be good as well. One of the things that I think is necessary to understand when you want to have this kind of philosophical discourse is when you talk about freedom and you talk about authority, it's important to realize that these terms have become coded with socio-political discourse in, I would say, the last 50 or 60 years to mean something that it never traditionally meant.
Yeah.
Authority was never, until recently, considered to be a negative, hostile, or bad thing. neither was freedom considered to be the opposite of that. Authority and freedom meant something divinely ordained, and through it you gained beneficence. Through it you gained prosperity. And I argue all the time that, as with most things in life, you need to shoot for a synergistic fusion of the divine order, of the natural order that we occupy. And the reason I bring this up for collectivism versus individualism, when you have an apex of, quote, freedom in the modern era, that can be anything from child trading, you get your pornography delivered to your door, in Kapistan. It could be Mad Max. It can be Somali pirates in Africa. That is the apex of freedom when nothing else matters. Then when you look at some of the modern expressions of authority as it means in the modern era, you've got COVID camps in Australia. You've got Papers, Please with your new vaccine app. Those are the expressions of freedom and authority as it is meant in the modern discourse. I don't think that those words mean either of those things. Authority means you are acting as with the authority of whatever the God figure is in the divine order apex. And freedom is what happens to everyone in that structure when things work in harmony in accordance to that order. And of course, being from a Christian society, being a practicing Christian myself, I use the Christian structure for that. If you have the patriarch, you have the man, that is the Godhead. And then you have a man who speaks with authority because he is a moral arbiter. He is acting as if God would. He is a Christian man. And underneath him are his sons, is his parish. And because they act in accordance of that order, the men and the women who make families and live in accordance to that order, they have freedom. They have safety. They have security. Their children can flourish. They will have time to share crops. They will have time to read and write books. And that is what authority and freedom really mean. They are products of a healthy, nurturing unity that works in accordance to the divine order, to the natural order. And I think that all of that I just said is completely vacant from modern discourse on every side of the fence.
Yep.
And it's
see, that's exactly why I wanted you on to talk with us, because that's almost an exact paraphrasing of what we have in our doctrine and on what we laid out on this actual metaphysical foundation of freedom and authority and all these other different things. And that you touched upon, I think, 2 or 3 different sections we have labeled out explicitly on those terms, and it was a perfect summary of that. I thought that was great. I have a big smile on my face because you just explained part of our ideology.
Yeah, definitely.
And philosophy we've discovered for us.
I'd like to segue into something we can actually talk about now, knowing you guys are receptive to my idea.
Can I say one thing? 1 second. I just wanted, because what you said basically was the same exact thing that I have written right here on. We have in our gilded group, we have roll calls basically just to give people the incentive to start a discussion and talk about things. So this one was about technology, but what you were saying about freedom and authority losing their definitions and gaining new ones is kind of the same thing that I've phrased as liberation and totalitarianism, where I feel like, so if you consider a worldview of a person as something that dictates every action, whether it's subconscious or not, whether it's a conscious action or whether it's something that's formulated from something deeper, you could consider that worldview as totalitarian, even as philosophically totalitarian. It affects the totality of the action that is taken by the individual. So even if you're a libertarian and you are apolitical and whatever, that worldview that you hold, these semantics that you derive this worldview from, those are totalitarian, if only to you. You know, so that's what I call philosophic totalitarianism. And so what I said was the increasing presence of technology means that 2 things are imminent, which is mass liberation and mass totalitarianism. And it matters the order in which these things occur. If tradition is to be preserved, then it has to gather a monopoly on technology to create the monopoly on power so that it can then order everything else properly in a top-down manner. And this means that totalitarianism of tradition is the liberation of humanity from its own vices. And then if the inverse occurs, which is what's seen today, mass liberation of the carnal desires of man from the responsibility bestowed upon him by tradition will result in a totalitarianism of those vices. So that kind of goes into what you were saying.
It's the exact opposite of what you said previous. It becomes the total enslavement of humanity to its vices and to sin.
Yeah.
I believe Aquinas and a few other philosophers touched upon that themselves as well, on the enslavement to your own vices, and the man in shackles and chains might be spiritually perfectly free and has an ascension to him, but the demagogue or aristocrat that is a complete subservient to his vices and to his deeper sins is utterly a slave to all those compulsions that he can't control.
Anyways, you wanted to segue into a different topic?
No, same topic, but I wanted to preface it with what I said about the in my opinion, the incorrect, let's call it indoctrination into what authority and freedoms are. I wanted to talk to you guys when it comes to the modern era, the people that we talk to in the Anglosphere. I do my best not to bring up authoritarianism or liberalism or freedom or liberty or whatever, because I feel like that impediment is too strong. That's why I do my best to engage with people on something shallow and simple that they can relate to in words that have not been codified in their head already. Generationally, like we talked about earlier with the anti-white narrative and the going free lexicon, which sidesteps those mean pathogens, that mind poison. And so when talking to others, you often will hear, well, I'm part of the West, I don't want to be a part of collectivism or whatever. When I talk to people about being part of a team, they like that. When I talk to people about being part of a co-op, they like that. Being part of here's a good one, a church group, right? These are collectives. These are people that have shared values, shared interests, and shared investments coming together because they share things and they want to accomplish things as a group. That is a collective. When it comes to individualism is when, in a healthy, functional collective, meritocracy, or the natural order, allows those who are exceptional or who have things to add to the collective or the group or the parish or whatever, because of their talents, their God-given talents. That is what leads to individualism. With no collective, there is no individualism. With no collective, there are only individuals, which can be easily puppeted and manipulated. So when I talk to people, I use a simple language like, here's a good one. I argue with libertarians a lot because several of my friends still are. And when it comes to authoritarianism and collective, I say, okay, well, do you have a job? And they're like, yeah. Like, do you work with a team of people? Yeah. Okay, well, that's a collective. You guys are working together to accomplish tasks to get paid to feed your family. But you're all still individuals, right? Well, yeah, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm like, okay, well, what are you talking about? And almost always, they never have an answer. They always just have these vague, nebulous, collective bad, individual good. That's another mean pathogen that we have to sidestep. And I don't have a go-free lexicon for that, but I'm working on it. I'm working on terms
that's actually something
language to help talk to people and get them to understand all the stuff that we're talking about. So my question to you guys today is, have you come upon any terms or easy to relate metaphors that get people talking and thinking like we just did here?
So one thing that I say, I'm just going to be real short, and then I'll give it to you, Cody. But one thing that I say,
be real short, but we know how that always goes.
No, don't worry.
All right, mine is actually real short. We do have a lexicon of words that we are building that are kind of things that we make up on our own. Things like praxism in and of itself is what we call ourselves, is derived from the word praxist, and then we turn that into this ideology that we're kind of developing and flourishing and discovering in a lot of sense. And so we have a bunch of other words to describe things that may not have words to instantiate what we're talking about because they're complex topics, or they're words that have already been grabbled and have those connotations like you're speaking about that we're trying to redefine or that we're trying to give a new dialogue to. And so we have actually that in our Guilded server.
And inferior now, bottom of theory.
This list of words that we're redefining. And then I'll pass it on to Vincent so he can.
So essentially, what you're saying is I try to not ever use the term individualism or collectivism to describe this set of ideas, but I use like super personalism, because everything that you're describing is essentially someone working to a cause that is beyond themselves, but that they still benefit from. So in the same way that, you know, a religious group can be beneficial to an individual, the individual is not the source of that religious group. And the same thing with the collective. If a collective can be beneficial from a religion, that still doesn't make it the source of legitimacy for that religion. The only thing that's above, or the only thing that's above that religion is the source itself, which is God. So that would be a super personal cause, whereas a subpersonal cause would be something like being a cog in a machine, or like being part of it would be part of a collective that these libertarians are afraid of being. So like the Soviet work camps, for example, that would be like subpersonal collectivism, whereas superpersonal collectivism would be like that religious group, that spiritual actualization. So things that lead to actualization would be something that is superpersonal, and then subpersonal would obviously be that materialistic drain. But for other definitions, we also have things like idolagus to denote something that is essentially a patriotism of the idea. And that's something that we like to preach when it comes to Praxism as thought, because that word Praxism that we have, it's not something that's... It is codified for us, but it's not something that is innately invented by us. It's something that we've basically discovered through research by research of philosophers like Evola and Guénon and people like them, and then also like religious concepts like the laws of Manu and of the Egyptian Mot. And all of these things we've taken and coalesced into one single document that's hopefully a little bit easier to digest than all of these like disunified, different sources. And so that's what we call Praxism. It's not something that we've...
sorry, go ahead. I thought you were done.
Oh, no. Basically, that's what we call Praxism, is that it's not something that we have created, but it's something that we've discovered and given a name to. And so all of these different definitions that we have for these words, I think that that's what we need to identify. It's something that already exists that we can give a name to. So like subpersonalism and superpersonalism, things like that. Anyways, what were you going to say?
I got you. My question wasn't necessarily how you guys answered. I think
that was the second part that I wanted to get to.
Getting just real quick,
how to rephrase things. Oh, okay, sorry.
Well, no, when I asked about simple terms. You guys are telling me about literary, philosophical terms that 99% of people that you bump into and talk to in your normal life are not going to. It's going to go right over their head. They're not going to care. I wondered if you guys had come across any simplistic, relatable words, like something new, something simple, like I don't know. Like, you know how in the Go Free lexicon, we've got stuff like anti-white, anti-Western. You've got white erasure. Simple terms that instantly, easily, for the layman, they know what you're talking about. I don't have any good words like that yet for talking about what we just discussed about individualism, collectivism, how freedom and authority intersects, and how one needs the other to function. I don't have any good, simple, relatable, easy words for that stuff yet. And I wondered if you guys had any.
That was the conundrum I was going to bring up in my second point, but I wanted to let Vincent finish. Is there are some people that just exist on this philosophical caste in their own head, kind of like how IQ is a bit determinate in what your abilities are in these certain intellectual pursuits. Like, you'd be much more suited in something like a pursuit of theoretical physics if you have a very high IQ, or you might be more acclimated to do something like easy manual labor if you have a much lower IQ, but you're still benefiting society and yourself. In this sort of mentality with this philosophical caste, there are some people that just, no matter how simple of terms you put it, can't digest these things because they don't want to think about it, or they can't think about it in this way. So they just take whatever is most comforting to them and simplify it to a skewed sense, like what many libertarians do on this sort of perversion of what this liberal libertarianism used to mean, especially in the context of the Enlightenment thinkers and founding fathers who had that intellectual pursuit and that philosophical cast about them. Whereas a lot of people today kind of just LARP and use these terms to justify their own vices. And even if you do reinstantiate these larger philosophical concepts into more digestible words, they won't register those things because it's not fitting that justification that they want for their material existence. And that's why I guess we have these bigger concepts to kind of, for a more intellectual crowd to understand, to get sort of that elite air on things. Because you got to look at like what the cathedral has done in today with how things aren't really executed on a consent of the governed sense, but it's kind of more forced on populations without anyone's overall consent.
The reason I ask is I'm trying to get people in my local area and all across America to care about something bigger than just saving their own hide and surviving the economic collapse. I'm trying to figure out relatable, simple words that get folks like, the hillbillies and the mountain folk I live with into thinking about a bigger, more divine structure, a more collective thing that I think that more people need to realize what we're talking about. But what we're talking about is a pretty high IQ philosophical spiritual subject.
That's the point I was making. Is some people just fundamentally can't.
I'd like to have some kind of term or easy series of metaphors and language to sort of get rural lay people more invested or at least aware of this kind of topic. That's why I asked you guys if you had anything like that, because it personally matters to me, and I've been butting my head against this wall.
I think the
that's
best
that's
way
actually
in that situation for you though is to just, like you were saying with the church groups and your libertarian friends with them working a job and things like that, is just to use analogies for these bigger concepts and sort of
I do
nudge them into. But I don't think there's any way to take those analogies and put them into simplified words to just kind of represent those analogies. I think the analogies themselves are the best way to have these people understand what you're kind of getting at in these higher philosophical concepts.
I agree and I disagree to an extent, because I agree with what Cody was saying on one level, but on the other hand I disagree, because I feel like you can come up with words that kind of strike at something. Like, for example, this is why we came up with words ourselves. Like for Praxism, we have Praxism instead of, hey, how would you like this weird collection of ideas that existed all throughout history? You don't go up to someone like that.
Fascism sort of thing.
Yeah. So I feel like you gotta like kind of make it up yourself, or like take different roots and put them together and see what they mean. But because I feel like you can maybe help people compartmentalize these things that you're talking about if you put it into the terms that they're used to hearing. But I think that something entirely new, like an entirely new lexicon, I don't think that has the capability of being received and understood by people like that. So what I think you got to do is kind of co-opt back that language that's been stolen from you. So like when you say liberty, you got to say it along your lines, along the terms that you define it on, but it is still liberty. It's still liberty by that definition. You just have to kind of...
I'm with you on that. Yeah, I'm with you.
Here's a thing I just thought of too right now, is help people understand words that actually apply to those words that have been co-opted. Like instead of liberty, society today is libertine, which is very, very close, but explain the difference on libertine is this decadence on degeneracy and things like that.
99% of people, they won't give a crap. They won't. Trust me. Like you got to use really simple terms and words they already know and already have a decent, realistic association with.
Yeah.
And that I haven't come up with terms to get people to understand the, authority, freedom, collective, individual stuff yet. I don't have any good, short, simple terms that really land with people yet, and I'm looking for them.
I don't think we have either, honestly. We're going to try.
That is a very hard question. That's something that would
eventually we may find any, but not right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we right now we haven't really found anything too simple.
We will eventually, but no.
So I do understand your frustration.
Too early.
Yeah, we've come across that same
give you answers too, but they're all like subpar.
Yeah, we've come across the same.
I mean, like you said earlier, we are working hard to plant seeds for trees we ain't never going to see the shade of. I mean, that's what we're all doing. That's what we're working on.
Yeah, we've definitely come across
5 years before any of us have words like that, but when we do, we need to start sharing them.
Absolutely, because we see those issues all the time with people, especially online, where people will try to validate their positions by using these words where it's like, I don't think that means what you think it means, but we can't really say what it means because, especially on certain social media sites, your characters are limited, so you can't even describe in detail what you want because, number one, no one's going to read your long paragraph, and number two, they're not going to know what you're talking about. So, yeah, I definitely agree with you that there needs to be a lexicon.
Gender's a very good example of that in like my personal life, because people always use gender. Oh, there's only two genders, sort of deal like that. But no one understands the root of like how gender has come about in modernity, where it used to just mean the inflection upon words in a language, and what everyone really means is sex, and that dichotomous nature of the male and the female. But everyone still goes to gender because it's been so instantiated in society, and
because
that's why
it's been
I keep trying to
engendered into our language.
exactly. Which gender is that linguistic process, but it's been used by that grabbly community of the Long March to the Institution type people that used it for those subversive means throughout society. And explaining that to a layperson, you probably lose them within the first couple of sentences. Or maybe you'll catch their interest and they'll be like, oh, that's odd, but they'll forget about it later on. But it's just I take the personal hill to die on. I'm like, no, instead of gender, use sex instead. That's more accurate. And people are just like, what do you mean? I'm just like, it's more accurate. It's kind of like a weird gaslighting in a way, but it's benevolent.
Yeah. Well, I've got enough time for one meaty topic. I have exhausted the things I had prepared for discussion today. Is there anything else on your list, Cody, or any of the rest of you that you wanted to sink your teeth into with me today? Because I've still got like half an hour here.
We actually, most of the things I wrote down were kind of touched upon in some way or the other, so it would kind of be reiterating the points.
I'm surprised, honestly.
Yeah, this actually has been really good conversation.
I do this several times a week with people, so I'm pretty used to this this ride. I've been on this ride before.
We're just getting started, so thank you.
But you're doing a great job. I'm having a great time. You guys are asking and saying smart stuff. This is a good framework. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to do it again. And if you guys want to, I'll even have you on my channel for a discussion one day if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great if you wanted to do that. Yeah.
I guess maybe some like a little more personal questions, not anything too
sure, I'd be
personal,
glad to
but
answer.
one of the things I had for you on like that kind of interview perspective is why the name Yizz the Eunuch? I know you have the discordant dragons thing, and I'm assuming it's something to do with Dungeons and Dragons, like you said, I think earlier on. If not on call, then off.
Discordant Dragons is absolutely a play on Dungeons and Dragons because it's got two Ds, and Discordant Dragons. I wanted to move away about a year ago. I wanted to create some kind of new content because I was like, okay, I can do content like X, I can do content like Y, but the things I believe in, the things I love, there are already smart men, strong men, charismatic men doing what I want to say in these formats. What can I add? Well, I'm pretty good at running a D&D game or any other role-playing game. Role-playing games and stuff have been my passion for like 30 years. I'm really good at it. And I'm also good at making people laugh. I'm pretty funny. And on top of that, I'm pretty smart, and I get a whole lot of big brain right wing, and I don't even like to use left versus right anymore, but like, all of us,
we don't either.
Let's just say traditional-minded folks, right? Like, I get all that stuff. I get the Evola stuff. I get all of the fashy Natsock stuff. I understand where that all comes from. I get the Christian stuff. I understand where that all comes from. And I thought, well, how can I reach people and get them invested, get people wanting to hear about and talk about stuff that I care about? Well, entertainment's a good way to do that. People love being entertained. They love laughing. And I took a page from our enemies. Our enemies are controlling the masses and creating regular people into shitlibs and anti-whites by shows like The Daily Show, by things like the Colbert Report. And I thought, you know what? Maybe I can do that. I'm funny. I like writing bits. I like doing characters. And so that's sort of where Discordant Dragons came from. But that was not the question. The question was about me being Yizz the Eunuch. Would you like to describe that?
Yeah, that was good. But that was a good explanation too.
Well, thank you very much. I am intersex. I am an XXY male. I have both a X chromosome and a Y chromosome that battled for dominance during my pubescent years. They raised me as a boy, but I didn't turn into one in puberty. Between 9 and 12, I developed like a female. And so I I don't like to talk about my genitalia. It's a messed up circus. But they found out that I had internal gonads, not in the place where ovaries were supposed to be, and of course not descended via the male variety of that, which is scrotum, testes, external. And later in my teens, I finally got to go to an intersex specialist that sorted me out, and of course I had to have those problematic gonads removed. And because of that, I became involved, unfortunately, with intersex activism, which was really just a gateway to LGBT activism in my late teens and early 20s. And so I had to learn the hard way how much of a villain everything connected to that entire umbrella of activists and anti-whites are. I call them all anti-whites because of the Go Free lexicon. Anti-whites who call themselves feminists, anti-whites who call themselves LGBT activists, anti-whites who call themselves trans intersectionalists, right? These are all anti-Western, anti-white people and actors, right? And they wanted to use me for their own ends and sort of make me a poster child for the cancer they wanted to push into schools and whatnot.
Oh.
And it is because of that I wanted to identify with language and words that they didn't just hate, but was also traditional. And traditionally, when you look at the last 3,000 years of history that we have, eunuchs have served many roles. They've been advisors to great men. They've overseen harems. They've been companions to some of the greatest philosopher kings. They've been lovers to some of the greatest philosopher kings. And so I liked the word eunuch. And so, you know what? I'm going to make that my term. And so I used it for a while. And then when I decided to have a public voice, I said, you know what? Yizz the Eunuch has a nice ring to it. I couldn't find any other content creator that had the word eunuch in the name. And it just flowed nicely off the tongue. And also, since I look and sound mostly female, I think that it would be a subversion and people would feel cheated. And I didn't want to trick anybody, and I didn't want people to think I pretend to be something I'm not. So I wanted to put eunuch in the name and let people know that I am a sexual anomaly. And I mean sexual as in biology, not having sex and romance. I am a sexual anomaly. And I am codified as female by society, because that's like, I don't identify as anything. I am what I am. I don't play the stupid trans game. I am what I am, and people codify me as female. They've codified me as female since I was young. And at the same time, though, I don't want to, because, I talk to a lot of nationalists, I talk to a lot of ethnats, I talk to a lot of hardcore Christians and traditionalists, and they rightfully hate the transgender agenda. They rightfully hate it. I hate it too. So I didn't want them to think that I was counter-signaling by using any of that team's terms, methods, ideas, or anything like that. So that's why I chose to take on eunuch as my moniker, is sort of, I want to wear that poison and that cancer that I splashed on my shield long ago. I want to wear that as sort of like a scar, as a memory to know where I came from, and so other people can identify that on me and know that I'm not like the transgender people, the intersex activists of today, because those people are pretty much all anti-white evil actors that are satanic. And I don't want to be associated with them. And I don't want people to think I'm pretending to be something I'm not. So that's why I chose the word eunuch.
That's amazing, actually. Wow,
that
adds a whole depth of respect for you that I have. That sounds harrowing.
Well, it was hell, because between like 9 and 19, my body kept start and stopping both male and female puberties. And I don't have an Adam's apple. I don't have hardly any facial hair, just a few whiskers. I didn't develop like a man, but my body had an active Y chromosome. And the ovotesty that I had, because when you have genetic, I forget which number of intersex it is. It's like 11 or 13 or whatever. There's a bunch of different kinds, but I have what they used to call gonadular hermaphroditism, which is where you have gonads. And for those of you listening that don't know the biology terms, a gonad is either a testicle or an ovary. That's a gonad. And humans generally have two. One is generally a little bigger than the other. And in gonadular hermaphroditism, which they just call ovotestes now, one of your gonads is the only one that works. The other one is usually atrophied or mutated. My secondary one was an atrophied tiny thing that had a blood vessel growing through it. So I had to have vascular work done too to fix that. But the gonad that I had was basically a testicle inside of an ovary, and both of them were randomly spitting out large quantities of either testosterone or estrogen during my developmental years. So I had night terrors, I had hot flashes, I had snap rage, I had cold sweats in school. I couldn't remember the things that I was reading because it was like I was dosing steroids and menopausal all at the same time as a 12-year-old. It was absolutely miserable. And until I got that sorted out, my life was pretty bad. And on top of that, you look at the social aspect of it, like, you know, being a girl who's not sucks just as bad as being a boy who's not. Like with me, it was never that, because the transgender narrative is you're like a guy or a girl that wants to be the other one. For me, it was I didn't know what the hell I was, and my body was constantly counter signaling itself, and I didn't know who I was or what I was supposed to develop or what I was supposed to do. And I had I had an okay father in some aspects, but he was abusive in other aspects. And I had a mother and father who divorced when I was young. I had a lot of family problems, but thankfully each side of my family were pretty good people, and they basically took care of me, even though I had a kind of shitty dad. But so I didn't have really good gender role models anyway in my personal life between, like, 5 and 15. So that alone right there gave me really bad gender issues to struggle against. And that led to a really, I don't know, I would say about 10 years between like 13 and 23. That was the hardest time of my life. And by the time I was 19 or 20, I got a hold of a doctor who was an intersex specialist that sorted me out. And by 22 or 23, I was a pretty stable, regular adult woman by that point. And that's when my life really started to get better and I became who I am today. And that was about 20 years ago. So now you know sort of my journey, what it was like, why it sucked, and why my moniker is Yizz The Eunuch.
That's a pretty phenomenal story. Wow.
Yeah, that's not what I was expecting at all, but wow, that's very cool. I like, just like Cody said, I have a new level of respect for having known that.
Well, I have a new stream series that's going to be starting either late this year or next year. I've had a lot of people who are homosexual, who are formerly transsexual, people who also have intersex conditions, reach out to me since I've had a public voice and share with me similar stories about, I've always been gay, or I transitioned as, as a 15-year-old because I thought it was right for me or whatever. But I also have a strong racial consciousness. I have a strong spiritual consciousness, and I am led to things that society calls evil, like, a collective white identity or wanting to live under a divine monarchy, that kind of thing. And so I am launching a new series called Rising from the Ashes, it's going to be a series that is all people like me who have been touched by this cancerous plague of different kinds of degeneracy and lies of the anti-white narrative. And we are going to share our experiences and hopefully inspire those out there to despite whatever lies or cancer that you've been told. Maybe you have a pornography addiction. Maybe you're transgender. Maybe you have a transgender daughter or son that you want to make connections with. I want to use my experiences and the cancer and the filth that got on me through those experiences that didn't kill me and didn't extinguish my light. I know about 5 or 6 others who I can launch a series with where we share stories like I just shared with you, and hopefully have a constructive discourse about sort of like how Evola talks about riding the tiger and dealing with what's in front of you and getting by so your ideas and what matters can propagate. Is that the right word? Propagate? Yeah, propagate. And I want that series to be an honest discussion on this is what it's like to be a product of this falling colossus, to be a product of the filthy goddess of diversity, to be a product of Moloch. Like, there are people like me that have been kissed by Moloch, and yet we are here right now talking about the stuff that we've talked about today. And I think that will be the basis of a good series, because I can't find anybody else that's doing a series like that. And I think that'll add a lot to the discourse. So hopefully I can have that together and have all of my people lined up for a good 6 or 7 interviews, either by the end of this year or early next year.
That's definitely something that I would watch.
I guess of the 4 of us, between myself, Regent, Vincent, and Mallory, I'm the much more maladapted one. And while I don't have anywhere near as harrowing of experiences you had developing, I definitely have similar sort of stories and experiences in that regard, because of the living situations and things I've had to face growing up in the inner city and things like that, with different influences that have affected me, kind of like how you've described, and I've come out the other side of it in a much more healthy manner, and kind of rectified those inner demons that have plagued me.
That's exactly what the show's going to be about.
That started to get externalized, and then I was lucky enough to stand in front of the precipice and kind of back away. And then I found actually during that period, I found these guys as Praxists, and they were still in a sort of rudimentary phase, and that helped me sort of using this philosophization and everything else and deeper dive into my own identity. I kind of use that as a building block to reconstruct myself in this much more healthy manner. And now I've done all these things in my own life that have been helping prepare me for those things. And I'd love to help you with that in any regard if you're interested.
Well, we'll be in touch, of course. The people that I am talking to now, they're mostly older than you guys, like between early 30s and early 50s. And that doesn't mean I can't have a young person on. It's just, the people that I have lined up are going to be coming on and talking about their decades of experience between like the 80s and now, being some kind of degenerate, some kind of gay, some kind of trans, some kind of sex worker, something like that, where they experienced the ugliest of the ugly that is being pushed on us by these satanic forces, and yet it didn't break them, and they are where we are now. And I think that'll be really good discourse. And it doesn't mean that someone young doesn't have those experiences. I'm not trying to say that. It's just I hadn't really been looking for younger people, because this is sort of a mature thing that you come to sort of later in life, and so that's the basis of the people I have lined up.
They also have like more to say too as well, because they're really older than us.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
they have a
again,
lot more
I'm not trying
experience.
I'm not trying to say that young people don't have a lot to
we
add.
understand,
Well, given that
if
the
I were
quality
you,
of young people we have today in our generation, I understand why some of them might be a little underdeveloped to handle those kinds of conversations without either breaking down or not understanding what you're trying to get at.
And also,
Yeah.
just decades of an adult gives you a type of vantage point to look back at what language means and how it was weaponized to hurt you, where a 25-year-old can't really do that, but a 45-year-old can.
oh yeah, definitely. If I were you, I feel like I would feel really, not subverted, I don't think that's the right word, but I would feel really upset at what especially modern non-binary people are trying to do, because essentially it seems like they're trying to co-opt your experience and then plug it into their own narrative.
Well, it's not that. It's all of the trans agenda. All of it. It doesn't matter if it's TERF, binary, hardcore trans, non-binary. All of it is the force of Moloch. All of it is satanic, because it seeks to disrupt and to invert the natural order. All of it.
Absolutely.
It's not right. And I don't, like, here's the thing. When it comes to me having people on my show who may used to be trans or who happen to be gay or whatever, I have a very high bar for anyone from that past. Like, you have to believe and to say and denounce certain things about the agenda, certain things about life and spirituality and all this good stuff that we like. They have to be at least to where most of us are, or more, before I'm willing to give them a voice, so I don't accidentally counter-signal or be subversive on accident. Because that's what was done to me for years, and I don't want to accidentally do that to others.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Well, is there anything else anyone wanted to discuss?
I think we've kind of exercised this conversation, but yeah. So May, if you want to just take us away.
Yeah, sure. Anyways, that was a really good discussion from everyone. That was very enjoyable to listen to. But as always, I hope everyone enjoyed listening into today's podcast. Make sure to check out our Linktree, as well as Yizz's socials in the description down below. And thank you so much to our founder, Vincent.
Yeah, no problem.
Our Leadership Council members, Kennedy and Cody.
Always
You're
a pleasure.
welcome.
And of course, a big thanks to Yizz.
And I am
big
very
thanks.
thankful
Thank
for
you.
you guys having me on. I definitely had a good time, and I look forward to more conversations with y'all in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. This was Mayloria, and we hope to see you back here next time at the Praxis Table Talks.